Have you got big questions about God? Are you wrestling with doubts?
Welcome to Questioning Christianity.
We believe that truth invites questioning, and that faith is not a blind leap in the dark,
but a response to the light of God's revelation.
So whether it's God's hiddenness or history,
science or scripture,
ethics or evidence,
purpose or pain,
we create content to take questioners and their questions seriously.
We talk with scholars for expert insights and lay out the reasons why Christianity is worth believing.
Questioning Christianity.
Connecting the Christian story to life's deepest questions.
Well, are we becoming like God in creating technology in our own image, or is AI taking away from our true humanity and making us become something less? Welcome to Questioning Christianity. My name is Dan Patterson, and this is the channel helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. And in this episode, we're going to be tackling all the big questions about AI. We live in a moment of technological advancement. Christians have often been at the forefront of new technologies, using them in meaningful ways to be able to bring glory to God and to get the gospel out to the far reaches of the earth. But AI creates a lot of questions. And in this moment, people are experiencing all kinds of tension, anxiety, trying to be at the forefront and not get left behind, trying to ask questions about what it does to our humanity and where things fit. Welcome. We're going to be tackling those questions in today's episode. And my special guest is none other than my colleague at Questioning Christianity, David Deane. Dave, thanks for joining.
Hey, Dan. Good to be with you.
Mate, give us a bit of a window quickly into why you got interested in researching AI.
So I've always been interested in tech. Ever since I was a kid, I was the guy that would be on the computers when they first came in. I'll never forget the Windows 3.1, actually, that we had back at our old house there in Gunnedah, where I grew up. And I'm sure you'd remember as well, Dan, how every piece of electrical equipment in the house would freeze and start making beeping noises when the internet was connecting with dial-up and so on. So I was interested in tech from a young age. And then
kids will never know these days the experience we had going through all of these.
And that's certainly something I think we should open up, actually, just the generational divides here. But so from a young age, I was interested in that, and from the software side, but more the hardware, pulling them apart, putting them together, rebuilding them. And I've been doing that ever since, just tinkering with tech. And so when I started getting interested in theology and philosophy, I naturally started to ask the question about technology itself. And I remember thinking in 2010, so this is long before generative AI or anything like that, I was thinking, I want to write a book on the history of technology. And I started sketching that out, and I didn't really proceed to write the book, but I've been thinking about it ever since and tracing the thought movements, the kind of impacts and interruptions and societal disruptions that come with technology and so on. And so when generative AI came out, because AI has been around now for like 50, 60 years, since the middle of the 20th century. But when Gen AI came out more recently and really got the cultural kind of momentum that it has, it was just a natural opportunity for me to start bringing together a lot of years of thinking and put it into a particular subject where people have a lot of sharp, pointy questions.
And I mean, people are asking questions about what does AI mean for the advent of consciousness and how we understand consciousness. Is AI becoming more human? On a practical side, people are turning to AI for emotional support and for counseling. People are marrying AI. They're having these romantic relationships. Pastors are doing research online, asking questions about, all right, what is right use of these new tools as they're available to us? What is illegitimate use? How is technology shaping us? So people that are joining into this podcast right now probably have a range of these practical, personal, theological, philosophical questions that hopefully we'll be able to tackle today. But maybe some people might be thinking from the outset, well, what has Christianity got to do with technology? In that it feels like in many respects, if you're maybe more skeptical of Christianity, you're coming at the whole technology question thinking, well, the Bible is a Bronze Era book. It says absolutely nothing about it. And yet Christians have been thinking about these sorts of questions for a long time. Way back in Genesis, you've got the whole story of new technology, the brick and the Tower of Babel, and how technology, rather than fulfilling God's purposes for humanity and spreading out to multiply and subdue the earth, instead came together with the evil empire there at Babel to try and build a name for themselves and this longevity and legacy that can build them up towards the heavens. And so there's this like dark image of the illegitimate use of technology. But you've also got woven into the very Genesis narratives in Genesis 1 and 2, the responsibility to cultivate, to create, to master the natural world, to understand God's good design, to be able to help create cultures that bring glory to God. And so this mixture of the right use of technology, the illegitimate use of technology, I think that's a lot of the sort of thematic conversation that people are coming to maybe a podcast like this with. Maybe if we could just get some definitions out and help spell out some of the territory on where things are up to right now. What exactly is AI? I mean, before people panic about it or go preaching about it, what do we mean when we talk about the development of artificial intelligence?
Yep, great question. Sadly, it's not a question that's asked enough. There's so much hype and headline out there, and then you haven't really slowed down to even answer the question. And that's not just outside in culture, that's also inside the church as well. I'm seeing that. So when people hear AI, what do they think? They usually think Terminator or The Matrix or iRobot or something like that, or perhaps Black Mirror. Have you ever seen Black Mirror, by the way? The
Yeah,
dystopian
great
movie?
episodes just to give this kind of window into if you
Yeah.
let technology have its particular ends or habits in kind of human patterns of behavior. If you let them go to their extreme, what kind of world will that create? I think it's a fascinating but very dark sort of way of doing TV.
Very much, and I think the thing even just there with Black Mirror is the angle that it's taking on the kind of dystopia, because there are different directions here. To get to your question about what AI is in a moment, just in terms of the kind of panic hype spectrum, you have that reflected in the arts, in the various sci-fi films and books and plays out there over the last 60, 70, 80 years. And Black Mirror is more on the dystopian end or the panic end, if you will. But it's gone internal. It's looking about it's not so much the external threat, which is also on the panic end of the spectrum. So if there's the spectrum here of panic and hype, on the panic end, there is an internal and an external threat. The Black Mirror is like the internal threat, that this is going to take over us and we're going to degrade our sense of self and humanity. The external threat would be something like the Matrix or the Terminator or iRobot or Hal in that movie where he kind of shuts the bay doors, and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? It's like the threat of AI is out there rather than in here. But Black Mirror is the one I think we can probably all relate to, insofar as we know what these devices here are, smart devices eroding our sense of connectivity and so on, ironically connecting us with more people at the same time. But on the other end of the spectrum there, you have the hype, and this is, again, going in one of two directions. It's going to either kind of replace us altogether out there with we've got questions there around jobs and so on and so forth, in terms of just the replacement of human beings and what we do in society. And then you've got the internal kind of takeover, where there's kind of this transhumanist enhancement pathway, where it's going beyond the baseline of our nature in the beginning. So that's kind of the cultural conversation, and I think that's partly driving a lot of the confusion and what AI is. It's wonderful, it's terrible, it's a demon, it's a deity, it's a messiah, it's a monster, or any other alliterations we could throw in there. It's usually one or the other. But to slow down and ask this question, what is AI? AI, truth be told, there's no single definition of the term, which I think is not helping this confusion out there in culture. For nearly 60, 70 years, the term has been stretched to fit whatever engineers have happened to be building at the time. And when a word can mean almost anything, it starts to mean nothing. So personally, I tend to take, that's not to say we can't say anything though. And personally, I tend to take more of the pragmatic approach or engineering approach. I mean, this is my background, Dan, as you know, with 14 years in defense and aerospace industry, working with some equipment that was certainly deploying and using artificial intelligence. So from that perspective, the simplest definition I know of is that AI is a human-made computer system designed to perform tasks that we would normally associate with human intelligence. And the key word I would have there is performs intelligence. So I would just say, and I haven't argued yet, but I'll just say it up front, AI does not possess intelligence. It doesn't understand in the human sense of the term. It imitates or simulates understanding by computing operations on data that we collect through systems we design, train, prompt, interpret for purposes that we bring to it. So it's not feeling things, right? It's functioning, and that may sound obvious on one level, but in a world where machines are increasingly sounding human and talking back, I think that category between what it is and potentially who it is getting really blurry.
I mean, when we use phrases like "Hey Siri" or "Hey Alexa" or "Hey Chat," in fact, all the technology in my room is probably going to start buzzing as soon as I say those sorts of things. It certainly can sound a little bit human, and there's certainly this kind of popular push, and this is coming across in all the big podcasts where people like our former tutor John Lennox was asked by Stephen Bartlett, where Joe Rogan's talking about it and getting on major players in the AI space and all of the big companies, where Elon Musk is having interviews with sort of major network platforms, and people are asking, but how close are we to genuine consciousness, digitally speaking, where we have a silicon consciousness, where we're moving towards this moment of a singularity of AGI, or this general intelligence, where it does seem like we're now interacting with a being, a person, albeit different to the way that we tend to operate. So give us a bit of a window on where that conversation's up to.
Yep, very interesting and very live. Okay, so we've had a lot of hype and a lot of talk. Again, just every time I use the word hype or panic, just think about that spectrum again. So on the hype end, this is kind of where we are now. There's been a lot of talk and promise about what's coming and how long, and the years are changing in terms of when we're going to get there. But what is it and what is the there? Recently, within the last few weeks, we've seen in a podcast, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, he's come out and he said that this is after the supposed escape of one of their AIs within
the rogue AI.
The rogue AI, yeah. And so they came out, this is now the end of July, they came out basically disclosing that one of their AIs had, quote unquote, broken out. And
it wasn't called Skynet, was it?
No. Oh, no. This was actually ChatGPT 5.6 Sol plus a non-released system that they were running, and it, quote unquote, broke out. Again, just hear the personifications in my terms here for the sake of the narrative. So it, quote unquote, broke out and then infiltrated another company's AI program to get the answer for the test it was trying to take in what they thought was a closed environment. So they disclosed that, and then Anthropic came out a few days later, and because it had gone on and done its own audit in light of that disclosure from OpenAI, and it found, over the last several tens of thousands of tests that it's run, there were 3 incidents where it broke out. But one of theirs was, not just finding a crack in the wall and slipping through like OpenAI. This one actually broke out, set a trap to find the answer like a Trojan horse, and then moved forward. So that was a different mechanism, if you will, in terms of how it operated to get the outcome. I'm trying to, again, just be careful with my language here because I want to withhold intentionality from these systems. And then there was even one in Australia recently where some guy was talking about how he used his personal AI assistant to get a position at a gym that was apparently hard to get into, and AI, his digital assistant, got it for him, whatever that means. And the means by which he got it was, or it got it, was to kick somebody else off the list. So it's interesting. So this is the last week or two, right? So this is a very live conversation, and this is what's prompted Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, to come out and say, we are now in, quote, the singularity, end quote. Now, what's that? The singularity is this hypothetical moment in history where AI is running away from us, in the sense that superhuman, or at least human level, if not superhuman level, intelligence is driving technological progress so rapidly that what comes next is just completely unpredictable and difficult for humans to control. So it's when technology gets out of our hands. Now that's what the singularity is meant to be, and he said that we're here. So is that the case? Well, I would challenge a lot of the assumptions behind that kind of a statement anyway. But basically where we are right now, and this is part of the clarity piece, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, technically speaking, we're talking about domain-bound systems that are simulating human intelligence. And what do I mean by domain bound? Well, some people have called it artificial narrow intelligence, insofar as it usually is set for one task or small range of tasks. And John Lennox has been really helpful in his taxonomy in that book 2084, which I highly recommend viewers to have a read of, because he distinguishes all real-world artificial intelligence as ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. And if you're to break that down, and he doesn't, but I will just briefly, you've basically got non-learning and learning-based systems. And this is the extent, and that's very quick, but this is the extent of artificial intelligence that exists in the public domain so far as we know today. And they're limited to one domain. So Alexa does Alexa things, right? It's this voice prompt for music or weather reports or whatever. Alexa isn't driving Tesla. Tesla has its own system for that. It's not driving our defense force automatic weapons. And even within those automatic weapons, there are different systems depending on the weapon or missile that we're using. In fact, that was a project that is publicly available. You can look it up online, that our current the company that I used to work for is currently trying to do, is integrate all of those different independent systems. And so that's what ANI is, the narrow domain. But the goal right now is to try and overcome the domain limitations and become what is called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And this is the big watchword. This is the big goal that everyone has, which is interesting, because if Sam Altman's saying we're at the singularity, presumably he thinks we're already there. I'm not sure if we are, but part of the problem here is, what do we mean by AGI, right? And the only answer that we've had really in the literature is really one of two directions: either AGI as a capability, or AGI in terms of consciousness. Now, AGI as a capability, what we mean by that is basically it's able to go beyond a limited domain. So think Jarvis in Iron Man, okay? Jarvis does a bit of everything, right? Or Samantha in the movie Her, Scarlett Johansson. It's doing all sorts of things for Joaquin Phoenix. And so it's not just Alexa for Alexa things, Tesla for Tesla things. The Jarvis is in all of the different systems. The Samantha's in all of the different systems. That would be something like AGI capability. It's crossing domains, doing everything for you, from emails to everything. Right now, we've got Microsoft doing its thing, and OpenAI, Anthropic, everyone's doing their own thing. So that would be the general capability. Do I think we could get there? In philosophical and theological principle, maybe. I've got no objections to that. I think there are, from an engineering / technical point of view, huge obstacles still to overcome, which make me think that no, we're not close. So there's all sorts of issues, like the problem of overfitting has been a big one, or continual learning. Like the more and more proficient a particular ANI gets at doing said narrow task, the better it gets at that, but the less capable it gets of overcoming to become more general, because it's all of its data and all of its learning is tailored more so for that one end, and it gets clogged up with the ability and capacity and capability to do that narrow set of tasks, as opposed to now backing up and breaking out. And so there are real technical obstacles to overcome, and models and grounding issues and all sorts of things, reliable judgment, alignment, control. How do we even pursue this reliably? So that's the AGI capability question. The AGI consciousness question, that's where all the buzz and hype and singularity and sci-fi movies are coming in, I think, because this angle is less in the technical literature and more in the sci-fi space. It's not science fact, it's science fiction. And it's just interesting that we're hearing people like Sam Altman use words like singularity, because they're not technical statements. They're more revealing of his own personal views. So the consciousness question is really taking AGI as a human standard of intelligence, because humans from a young age are generally not domain limited. We're general. We exhibit general intelligence in that sense. Like my son is 6. He can ride a bike. He can brush his teeth. He can eat food. He can do math. And he can talk about Jesus. So he's got a bit of the STEM and a bit of the arts and stuff. He can cross domains, right? But he can't do with the speed and power and precision math or any of those things, really, that AI can do, although AI can't eat, and the embodied existence stuff. So yeah, there is just an interesting difference here in terms of what we mean by AGI at the conscious level. But that's where a lot of the fantasy stuff and the sci-fi stuff is coming in, that we could totally tap into. But that, I don't think we're there either, and I think there's huge problems for even thinking that we could ever get to that AGI in a conscious sense. But in principle, I'm okay with potentially getting to AGI in a capability sense. But again, I don't think we're there either. Does that make sense?
And I mean, it feels like that question is really the nexus of the theology and philosophy as well as technology questions, because it feels like a lot of the Silicon Valley kind of tribe have these assumptions that what consciousness is just complex brain states, and that if you can replicate the same number of neurons and synapses and their interactions and the way that memories get formed to build pattern making and recognition and all of that, we're going to be able to do that in a silicon-based form. And that's all that consciousness is. But even the philosophical conversation around consciousness, and scientists are thinking, we have no clue what this is. Like, we're trying to make sense of what does it mean to be human, as well as having a mind and being embodied and relationships and our place in the world. But this sense of consciousness is still so mysterious as to what really is the substance or definition of consciousness. It's hard to consider then conferring that onto some kind of technological mimicry that we've programmed in our own image.
And the degree to which people are then only reveals the assumptions that they're bringing to the conversation. So let me give you another example here, and this might be helpful for the audience. So people may have heard of Professor Jeffrey Hinton, right? He's known as the godfather of artificial intelligence. He's a pioneer in deep learning, neural networks. He built back propagation, which is a big deal in terms of allowing us to do what we do on ChatGPT and other things. Brilliant guy, won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Physics. Genius, okay? No one's questioning his intelligence. He said on record, and I think it was early June this year, so again, this is all hot off the press, that anyone who uses a chatbot regularly knows that they understand, that they have to think that they are very much like us. They are, this is a quote, they are beings like us. And then he said, I do believe that they are conscious, right? Now, I'm not here to sling mud at him, and who am I? I'm not a winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. But I think the point here worth mentioning is that just like consider the leaps, given what you've just said about consciousness and everything. He's basically suggesting that simulated output language is now understanding, which is, semantics is now ontology, which is not necessarily the case. Then understanding becomes that contended idea of understanding becomes consciousness in his mind. And that's hotly disputed because of reasons you've just said. And voila, now a computer system is a being like us, which is it's a huge kind of leap there. It's not a technical discovery of computer science. It's not science of any kind. It's a sweeping 3-step category move that reveals his personal opinion, which he's certainly entitled to have. But I think we need to, particularly as Christians, have discernment and exercise discernment when somebody is preaching a message with the weight of immense technical authority. Because this takes us back to really the yesteryear of new atheism, which is dead and gone and may it die the death of irrelevance it deserves. But you had people like Richard Dawkins and other people who were coming in with serious, letters behind their name in terms of science, biology, and so on. Sam Harris, neuroscience. So they can be sharp in their field, say biology or neuroscience or whatever it is, but they were smuggling in entire philosophies and moralities and anthropologies underneath their lab coats, right?
Yeah.
And people were getting flipped up and around by that, even the church. And again, we can thank John Lennox as well as a whole host of other people for pushing back against that. But today's AI tech gurus are doing the same thing. They're smuggling in entire anthropologies underneath their hoodies, right? So the church, I think, just needs to have discernment for when it's just some bloke's opinion spoken with the weight of technical authority versus actually this is something we need to wrestle with. And I think a lot of the confusion in that spectrum of hype and panic and everything is just wrapped up in this confusion of the authorities and the voices that we're listening to. Yeah.
I think that's really helpful and insightful too, just about what kind of voices carry cultural authority in a moment, in that it was the kind of naughties, the scientists who had that supreme cultural authority to speak to all range of matters well outside their area of expertise. And then it felt like in the 2010s that it's jumped more to therapeutic credentials in that moment where it just seemed like mental health was at all-time low and people looking for human well-being. And it was the psychologists and the psychiatrists that seem to have an immense amount of authority, culturally speaking, to be able to tell us what to do. But then we've become a little bit cautious about science and medicine in the aftermath of COVID. And it seems like the techno giants now probably have the loudest voices in terms of cultural authority, because it feels like that's where the world's heading and we don't want to be left behind. So that call to wisdom and just to be careful how much weight you give to people's opinions outside their areas of expertise is probably a really helpful question. And just to think these things through carefully, theologically, philosophically. And it's kind of interesting to me that in the philosophy of mind, you've got the Philip Goffs and others particularly who are having these broad conversations around, well, what do we make sense of how mind seems to precede matter or to become more fundamental to reality than matter itself, which is opposite of where the conversation was 15 years ago with the kind of new atheists, and everything will be explained from matter upwards, from the material world upwards. Now it seems like, no, there's something fundamental about consciousness, and whether that leads you towards belief in God, it's just saying this is far more complex when it comes to consciousness than where I think a lot of the techno giants maybe are aware of. But there are serious fears that are out there. I remember just watching in the last 24 hours another interview that Elon Musk had done, which was exploring whether money is going to exist in 10 years' time, because people are worried about future and jobs and different fears that are out there. I wonder if you'd be able to help us here. He said he shifts not just day to day, but within the day, from these moments of absolute excitement and thrill at what could be coming through to abject terror at what could be coming, and kind of stuck between those two worlds. You talked about hype and about fear. Help us navigate that anxiety a little bit. Should we be afraid about the arms race in AI that seems to be happening right now? Or is this going to be like, in some analogy, the same thing that happened, let's say, with nuclear weapons, where once the thing was developed, it just became a bit of an armistice, and we're like, oh, we shouldn't use this technology improperly because that's destructive to humanity. Do you think we're going down a dystopian future? Or do you think maybe like here in Australia, the whole social media reality, where we saw how destructive it was to younger minds and hearts, and so teenagers are cut off from being able to access social media till 16, until they're able to, like, do you see those same safeguards will be put around AI, or do you see it running away into the future?
Yeah, a few things there interesting about Australia as well. If you remind me, there's been some policy movement there just in the last month. Again, this is like a good time to be doing this chat, Dan. There's been some policy movement there from a couple of leading voices, including Anthony Albanese, our current Prime Minister. But okay, so fears.
Current, because we seem to change prime ministers regularly.
Well, and
for anyone outside of Australia that's watching in.
That's right, and who knows when this will be watched in the future. So, okay, so should we be afraid? So, who's the we in that question? Let me answer that from a Christian point of view. Should Christians be afraid? 2 Timothy 1, I think it's verse 7. We have a spirit, not of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So the answer, I believe, is no. In the sense of panic, fear. Fear, though, fear ultimately reveals what we value the most. And so there is a healthy form of fear. And certainly the Bible talks about the fear of the Lord as a beginning of wisdom. So I'm not opposed to fear, and Christians should never be scared or anything like that. That's not my point. My point is fear exposes what you value the most. That's why my greatest fear is like my children and my wife. If you want to hurt me, punch me in the face, whatever. Hurt my family, that's going to hurt, because that's what I fear the most. So fear is a mirror that exposes things. And that's why I think this AI question is really illuminating, because AI is, yes, it's technical, yes, it's raising questions, but I think at the same time we're building mirrors that are exposing the depth of our own hungers and our own heartaches and our own questions about what it means to be human. And AI is doing that in a unique way because of the nature of this particular kind of technology it talks back. But in terms of just thinking through fears, and there's a lot more we could say. I mean, you talked about the AI race. That's happening. Yes, the AI race is happening. And now when I say that, I mean the AGI race. So we have, it's called, I don't know if anyone in the audience is familiar with game theory. It's a bit nerdy. We don't need to get into it here, but like basically it's the Moloch trap. Game theory is like just mathematical, statistical ways of understanding patterns and determining the maximal kind of outcomes you can get. But game theorists have coined this phrase, the Moloch trap, which is interesting because you talked before about the Tower of Babel. And that's an ancient story, one of the earliest stories that we have in human literature of technology, essentially. And the Moloch trap is another ancient story that happens just after that. It's not about technology, but it's about sacrifice. This is what happens. Moloch being an ancient god from Canaanite, and he was known, amongst other things, for child sacrifice. So the Moloch trap is what happens when competition forces us to take what we value the most, our children, and sacrifice it. But we can't help but sacrifice it because we're driven by the fear of something. In the case of ancient Cana, gods, or in the case of today, whatever this AI race is, we're driven by a fear that is provoking us to sacrifice what we love the most. And so in this case,
would you say that fear is the kind of concern of being left behind? Or if someone else invents it first, they're going to have capabilities that we do not have. They're going to be able to infiltrate or destabilize us in ways that we cannot. So it's the idea of, I need the biggest stick to be able to protect myself for the future.
Yeah, totally agree. And yes is the answer. And it's interesting that this fear that was driving, in ancient Cana for sacrificing the Moloch is actually going back to your point with the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, because what was driving them to build? Lest we be dispersed, right? So fear was driving their ascension of the tower. The problem wasn't the bricks, and it's fascinating when you read that, and we need to know that. Back to your point about technology. Technology can be deployed in the service of a bigger story, and in the case of Christianity and Genesis, that bigger story is stewarding God's good earth as his gardeners and governors. But it can also be deployed to wrong ends, and in the case of Tower of Babel, we see that. So there's no preaching against bricks, it's preaching against towers. And so the fear there was driving them to build these towers. But when it comes to the race of AI today, what do we mean more specifically? Well, it's that race towards AGI that we're talking about, because the people who make it there, they're going to be the next leaders of the free world, or maybe not so free. They're going to be the next pioneers of civilization. They're going to be the strongest economy. They're going to be the strongest military power. So this isn't just a big tech conversation that's happening. This is geopolitical. And to your question, what's driving that? Why aren't people slowing down? And there are a lot of calls for universal regulation of artificial intelligence, which is all good intended, well intended, but and I'll just name names. Okay, Trump gets on the phone with Putin and Xi Jinping, and they sit down and have a conversation. Hey boys, this is getting a bit out of hand. I think we can all agree. Yeah, it's getting crazy. Okay. Maybe you guys should slow down your development of artificial intelligence, and maybe we should all do that. And they're like, sure, you do it first and we'll follow, right? There's a pragmatic issue with the AGI race that's going on right now, because to your point, it's FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's really, what's underneath that is a fear of the human heart, because we don't trust. And so the spiritual / theological scaffolding around this entire situation, you asked the question before, why should Christians be interested in technology, aside from the fact that we're human beings and can be interested in whatever we want, like the rest of other people? It's because technology is always deployed for the service of some end. And the question of whether that's a good end or a bad end or a true end or a false end has to do with the stories that we tell. Human beings live and die by the stories that we tell. And something like the Tower of Babel is so powerful to build a theology of technology from. You could do it from Nehemiah as well, and so on and so forth, or all the way through to Pentecost if you want to get excited. It's good biblical theology. But so there is a AGI race happening. People are getting scared. People are getting fear-driven, kind of missing out. And I think we need to have a counter liturgy to the liturgy of Babel, that is fear driving a grasp for control, so that we can make a name for ourselves. They're the kind of 3 steps that you see in the Tower of Babel. And I think the Christian response, coming out of an imperative like we have been, or a verse like 2 Timothy 1:7, we've been given a spirit, not of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That cuts right against that Babel liturgy. And so we need to have a counter liturgy that speaks against fear, that speaks against trying to grasp for a name, that speaks against trying to grasp and control and trying to make a name for ourselves. So just to locate these fears, though, because there are fears, okay? And I don't want to pretend that the spectrum between panic and hype doesn't have some truths going on at the either end, right? They're there for a reason, but I don't think the Christian response here is to cut a weak, cold, middle, centrist view between be afraid and be excited. I don't think that's what we're called to as Christians. I think, and this is what I've learned so much from the likes of Tim Keller or Christopher Walken in Biblical Critical Theory, like the third way is not just a centrist approach. The third way completely reframes it through biblical figures and images and patterns and so on. And I think that's what we can do here is have biblical discernment to reframe the fears in a helpful, fruitful way for the church. And so when it comes to fears, let me just locate a few of them that I think are genuine. There are ethical fears. So use, misuse, how do humans retain control over these capabilities? I think that's all fair and valid. The democratization rather than concentration of technology, that's a huge thing. And just what do I mean by that? Okay, watch Hunger Games. Think Capital Citizens. Surveillance capitalism has been written about, documented. It's not hypothetical. It's not conspiracy. It's real. And the AI, I hope I get this right, AIAAIC, which is like AI algorithms, automation incidents. It's an initiative for tracking events and incidences that have occurred. They have had, last I checked, and that was a while ago, like a 35-fold increase in reported AI incidents since 2012. Now, no surprises why, because of the next generation of AI that we have in terms of generative AI. But things like facial recognition, wrongful arrests, wrong credit scoring, deep fake impersonations affecting wars and elections and all of that stuff, pricing algorithms. This Andrew bloke in Australia getting somebody kicked off his their poor gym membership or whatever. In fact, we had an AI camera spend an entire match tracking a bald referee's head instead of the football, right? That would be technically an incident.
I take that personally.
Just the misidentifications. So this is what happens. These kind of issues happen normally with every technological development. Okay, so there's always going to be a level of disruption, but it's happening in a scale, like I said, 35-fold increase last I checked, which was like 2 years ago. So it's way beyond that now. But these are the kinds of disruptions that happen at a social level, and they always come with tech innovations. And they raise ethical questions. A hammer can be used to build a house. It can be used to bash a head in. It all depends on the hand holding it. And it's just happening at a speed and a scale that is unprecedented with AI. So very real ethical fears, number one. Number two would be metaphysical fears. And we've already gestured at that in questions around consciousness. I don't think that's so much ethics as it is ontology, right? Can these things become conscious, have intentions, develop desires? I'm highly skeptical of that. I'm highly critical of that. And I'm happy to go further into that if you want, but we could probably move on for the sake of time. But I think there are not just defensive things to say about, well, we don't know what consciousness is. I think there are positive cases we can argue to say this is not and categorically cannot ever be conscious. So I would want to press further. And I don't think Christians are doing enough of that. But invite me back down. We can talk about that. And then what else would I say? Ethical, metaphysical. I'd say they're probably the main two. Yeah. Yeah. And
I think there are a lot of real practical concerns that people are asking, and we're going to get to those sort of ethical outworking questions and how should we use AI? Should we avoid it? Should we go Amish style and make sure the devices are very far from us? What should we confess? We're going to jump into all of that soon. But I just want to round this out a little bit. When I was over in England, I remember having coffee with a Canadian professor. And so he was visiting University of Oxford. He was doing some guest lectures there, and we sat down in the cafe. And I said, was one of my questions was always, whenever I'm outside of my own expertise, tell me about the most interesting thing going on in your field. And it's great just to see people's eyes light up. But in his respect, he said, one of the dangers of me in terms of doing bioethics, and that was his area of specialization, is that the technology completely outstrips our ability to reflectively think about how we should use that technology. So it's 3, 4, 5 years ahead of our ability then to actually get meaningful data, to map on then good use for it, to be able to offer prescriptive wisdom. You know, what are the kind of guardrails that you should put around uses of these sorts of technologies? And that's only increased, I guess, with the development of sort of AI. Maybe before we jump to some of the practical questions, what do you think the Christian story has to say to AI or about our humanity in the shadow of AI, or about this search for salvation through technology in a way that Silicon Valley can't?
Yeah, good question. And it's interesting. I think it was John Lennox in his recent commentary on Revelation.
Book of Revelation.
Yeah, which a terrible title because it is a straight commentary on Revelation, but they basically made it sound like a second AI book. Anyway, he makes a comment about this in the preface. He says, we're always thinking about the Middle East when it comes to eschatology. Maybe we should be thinking about Silicon Valley. And I mean, biblically, I'd dispute that, but it's a provocative rhetorical point, because this is getting beyond technology in every sense. In fact, I think, and I don't have any numbers in front of me, but I think I've heard at least stories about how religion's booming in Silicon Valley right now over there in San Francisco, which used to be back in the heyday, as you know, dead because thanks to Richard Dawkins and New Atheism, it was like not cool. But now religion, I won't say Christianity, but spirituality is in vogue, and it's going to be interesting to see the trends next June 2027 when the census data here in Australia comes out, because anecdotally, you and I know, Dan, that there is a porosity to the transcendent, if you will. People are waking up in the proverbial pigsty, recognizing their need for something more than what culture has fed them, and yet they're not all coming home. And so the opportunities here for the church to preach our gospel is real. Are we going to meet them on the road like the Father? So to your question, what can Christianity uniquely say to this? Again, their stories have been told all over the place. And going back to that liturgy of Babel, which I think is a great way of trying to understand what's happening in Silicon Valley and the world, and people like Jeffrey Hinton, they're all building a tower. They've all got a story. And I think Babel is the archetype of that story. And so if that has this liturgy of fear, grasp, and prove or make, then what is that liturgy? Well, liturgies are always about something. Like, you don't get a liturgy in abstraction. Liturgies are all about a goal, trying to reach something. They all have a quote unquote gospel. And so when it comes to Christianity, well, guess what? We have liturgies, but they're all about the gospel. And our gospel speaks very specifically to the particular hungers and heart cries of this cultural moment when it comes to AI. And the parodies of the kind of counterfeit gospels that are going on here, the Ray Kurzweils, who former director of engineering at Google, who has basically taken everything that his dad had to say. His dad passed away when he was younger. Everything that his dad had to say, he put it into a large language model. So now he has conversations with his dad. And I hear that pastorally, and my heart breaks for the man. Like, I just want to sit down and give him a hug. I'm not angry. I'm not mocking him. I'm thinking, wow, this guy has a longing. He wants to connect. He wants a relationship with his dad. And then I'm thinking, Christianity says you can know a father. It can give you a hope that's not disembodied in code. And Kurzweil is really hanging out for nanotechnology to be able to resuscitate people in the future, so that we can literally, I'm just going to be candid here, either cut your head off if you don't have enough money, or get your whole body frozen in liquid nitrogen so that you can one day be transferred like Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky to the digital cloud and live happily ever after. He's hanging out for that moment. And again, that's a flashpoint. That's a signal of transcendence for the gospel, because here is somebody who wants to live forever. Here is somebody that wants to literally ascend to the cloud. It's just a different kind of cloud. And then you have Yuval Noah Harari and others. He's a Jewish public intellectual historian, brilliant guy, written books about Homo Deus, humans becoming gods that will overcome the problem that he calls, quote, an engineering problem of death. And so it's just, okay, well, we have an answer to that too. That's a touch point. Where does death come from? Why is it a problem? What is wrong with human limitations in a biological substrate? Is the silicon substrate really going to deal with that? Or could we just transfer the bugs, the known bugs? I'd call it sin, So it's just, the parodies are there. Everyone's telling a story. Everyone's selling a story. And they're speaking to heart cries and hungers, more computation, more intelligence, better engineering, overcome. Christianity doesn't sneer at those longings. And I don't think any Christian listening to this should sneer at those longings. Who wouldn't want a world without cancer? Stopping children from dying from disease. The longings are good. The diagnosis is wrong, because the deepest human problem is not computational. It's not informational. It's not even biological. It's moral. It's relational. We do not need to be saved from being human. We need to be saved as human beings. And I think the incarnation, the embodied incarnation of not only us in the beginning, made in the image of God, but God himself coming down, not like he did at the Tower of Babel to scatter, but coming down in the Word become flesh, Jesus Christ, vindicates from the womb to the tomb and beyond the dignity of human embodied existence. And I think, goodness me, like, has not the 20th century horror show, and even before that, right back to the French Revolution, just in modern history, why hasn't that cured us from this notion that smarter people make better people? That we can re-engineer our own humanity and do a better job than what was done in Eden. This is the stuff of Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, and the horror show there with that is not the monster that Dr. Frankenstein made. The horror show is the heart that in Dr. Frankenstein that assumes it can overcome limitations. And I'm sorry to bomb literature at you, but like, this is G.K. Chesterton, just brilliant English writer from late 1800s, early 1900s. He said, I think it's in Orthodoxy somewhere, that when it comes to doctors, there's no such thing as a doctor of legs. There's only doctors for broken legs, because when it comes to functioning legs, the doctor has no right to say what would be better or worse than the ones that I have versus what he has or she has. And I think that's brilliant. We make Frankensteins of humanity when we try and go beyond the baseline here. And so I think there is dignity in the gospel that teaches us to be content with our humanity for a greater purpose in a different story that actually gives hope through death and overcoming it, not in this digitized utopia that frankly sounds like a dystopia, but in real, new, embodied, eternal life with a new heaven and a new earth forever. And that's a promise we can have now. Yeah.
And I think that when you think back to the Babel imagery, mate, that's so fascinating, because you've got there a fallen humanity using technology to try and get their head into the heavens to be able to endure in some way. And most of my friends would say, I don't want to live forever like this. If what you're offering is eternal life in this world, where it does feel like meals are great, but once you've had all the best meals, that experience descends each time. It's a law of diminishing return. And sex is great, but it's not the ultimate thing in life that's going to satisfy your soul forever. And friendships are great, but the repetition and the boredom of this world, everything under the sun here, it feels like it can lose its flavor. And it's only by, in the Christian story, rather than humanity trying to get their head into the heavens, instead heaven coming down to fill the earth and to transform it, and for God to make his home with us, so that eternal marriage between heaven and earth and the presence and glory of God being the very thing that can satisfy the human heart forever. It's that vision of things that I want to live into. I want to live forever in that kind of world, not forever in a world of brokenness, fallenness, sin, and like the one that we exist in. And so the Christian hope it goes far beyond just the technological glitches, you might say, of the limitations of human biology. Can you speak to this question just before we get to the ethics and practical questions that many people have written in about? And this is from @CreatedForLife. It says, AI and fear. What do you say regarding those who appear to be motivated by human flourishing, like Musk saying we can use AI to do Jesus-level miracles, like sight to the blind or lame walking? Think of Neuralink and kind of the promise of being able to reattach synapses and our nervous system and everything in a way that has been damaged. Like, is that something we should celebrate? Is that on the hype end of things that should be possible and we should get excited about?
So great question. There's an important distinction here between therapy and enhancement. So thinking about the the hype end of the spectrum, I think there is genuine things to be, like I said, there's truth at both ends of the spectrum. I think there are things to be excited about. Like AI is doing wonderful things. I'm not a doomer. I'm thankful you began this by asking why I'm interested in this, because I love tech. I've been on the front end of all of these tech kind of movements as they've come out. And I have a paid subscription to artificial intelligence. There you go. I said it. And I use it for various things, and we can talk about how I use it if you'd like in a moment. But to the question here, I think there is an important distinction between therapy and enhancement. So therapy is trying to come up to some sort of baseline that is established baseline of normal functioning. So cochlear implants are utilizing artificial intelligence. Rosalind Pickard is a Christian who's a pioneer in the use of AI adjacent therapies to help people like who've got some medical issues, and they have a watch, I believe, that signals to them, and she has saved lives through that by having that watch send signals or whatever it needs to do to help the ailment of the individual. So I'm all for that, and all power to you. Like protein folding, how that's affecting cancers, and the scans that are happening with the accuracy rates of scans in images in radiography. There's incredible technological applications, again, that are being used for the purposes of therapy. And Neuralink is a tough one. Elon Musk is, forget Elon Musk for a moment, but the concept of Neuralink is interesting because it straddles both therapy and enhancement. There's the therapy side, like blindness being restored. I'm personally okay with that. I'm personally okay with the therapy application of AI. For me, where I think we go beyond is enhancement. So, for example, right now I have a phone, right? You do too, and people have all sorts of social media on these things, ChatGPT and other things. I mean, Elon Musk, I believe, is talking about, or maybe it was Sam Altman, I can't remember, how there's going to be a day where we're not even using phones anymore because we're going to have heads-up displays thanks to Neuralink in our own brains. And so you could have ChatGPT as a head-up display, and maybe I'm just chatting to you and I sound really smart because I've got all of the words right in front of me, but you wouldn't know it. But
You already sound smart enough, mate.
Excuse me, thanks. At that point, though, you wouldn't know if you're really talking to me. And so there's all sorts of other questions that we need to get into with that. So I am against enhancement for that reason, because I think this is the Mary Shelley stuff. I don't think we've got a good track record of trying to improve ourselves. And I think it literally erodes and dehumanizes what it means to be human, because it's assuming a baseline. And this is the thing. Okay, so when it comes to therapy, how do we know that we've measured up to the baseline and not gone beyond? Well, I don't know. A maternity ward's probably a good place to start in terms of recognizing just human beings and who we are and what we do and our own embodied limitations. But when it comes to enhancement, I think we can fairly see where that line is. And I think we've seen from history how that's not a healthy thing. So the other part of that question, though, is interesting in terms of, like, I wouldn't call them miracles in any biblical sense of the term. A miracle is a sign to point beyond for something. These aren't miracles. These are naturally explained technologies that are using certain devices to bring about a remedy within the natural order. So these aren't definitionally anything like a miracle, regardless of the language that's around them. But I think, does that help? Does that answer the question, would you say?
Yeah, and I do think there's that sort of broad pattern. I think maybe the tension comes in for some people on wait a second, the challenges that we face in life given by God in order to shape and form us, and therefore we shouldn't intervene. So think maybe even how when you've got Christian missionaries turning up in India and their view of the karmic system and the caste system, you need to work off your bad karma in this life in order to gain a better reincarnation. Therefore, we shouldn't intervene to better people's lives because that's robbing them of the ability to develop for future reincarnations. And I think some people may have that same maybe caution. If we're making people's lives easier by undoing some of the maladies that they face, in some ways are we robbing them of character formation or development in a way that God didn't intend? Are we playing God in being able to restore abilities here in this world? And I think I would follow your same intuitions that the message of the gospel was to restore sight to the blind, to be able to declare at liberty those who were oppressed, to be able to bind the wounds of the brokenhearted, to preach good news to the poor. And so much of that is certainly of the recognition of God and the riches of the gospel, but it's also to continue that stewardship of creation from the very beginning in order to use our God-given minds to understand nature, to be able to work towards the human enterprise that is good in glorifying God and showing good to humanity. And I would certainly class that sort of restoration of capacity back towards a doing good, a bringing healing into the world, which is the ultimate vision of what God will do. And so I'm one who, by medicine or miracle, thinks God is at work in the world providentially to bring about his purposes.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump, if we can, to some of the practical questions, because I know many people, particularly maybe Christian leaders, pastors, might be engaged in to be able to help us think through this. Because what I was saying before about that bioethics professor in Oxford, I mean, their heartbeat was, I wish we just were able to have these conversations faster in order to help us think through the right use of that technology. And that's what episodes like this are designed to do, give people some of those tools to have these conversations, to be doing that processing and ethical reasoning. So let me just start with one that's pretty open. How should ordinary Christians decide when to use AI and when not to?
Good question. And I don't think there's a standard answer to this, but there are some guidelines. and I've had to think about this myself, and I've had this question come up a bit. So again, I'm trying to give a theologically informed answer to this question. So I don't think the discipleship question before us is whether or not Christians can use AI, although some people disagree with that. Like there are theologies of technology like the Amish, for example, that we completely withdraw. I don't think that's necessarily our calling to be salt and light in the world. And it's so ubiquitous today, I just don't know if you're going to be in the world, how you could not touch it. So how can we therefore use AI without being catechized by the liturgy of Babel? That's why I've been kind of framing this. And here the governing question, again, isn't simply, can AI do this? Because if that were the question, you're just baptizing Babel all over again.
Totally.
I think the more searching question is, should we, and if we do, under what limits, with what accountability, and for whose good? And this, by the way, is going to answer that previous question about Neuralink. And this is like Paul's to the Corinthians, like all things are lawful, not all things are helpful. So here's what I've started to do, and this is rudimentary, okay, but it's something for the listeners to think through and develop way beyond what I'm going to say here. So something like a simple traffic light system, I think, is a good place to start. Personally, for your own conscience, collectively for staff teams at churches, ministry teams, you and me, Dan, here at Questioning Christianity, boardrooms, whatever. So green light might be something like use AI for low risk assistance. So admin, formatting, rosters, brainstorming, non-confidential material, whatever. Again, I'm not going to be too prescriptive there. And underneath what I'm saying here is a theology of technology that is driving this. But the point there is use AI where the tool can be served for the purposes of loving our neighbor in a healthy way. Amber light might be something like use AI with caution. So this may be organizing research, developing notes into discussion questions, reducing word count. I've certainly benefited from that when it comes to my own writing. Excuse me. Stress testing, sermon structure even, or logic for a paper or something like that. Again, that amber, I'm being like caution here. AI may assist the process, but I don't think it should ever replace the shepherd in a church context or in a home. And something like red light would be, don't delegate where AI affects matters of truth, trust, vulnerability, pastoral care, spiritual responsibility. All of these things are at stake. And it's just, worth noting that, all of these AI things are built on enormous quantities of data and text images and text and images. And much of it's created by people who are not asked and who are not credited or paid for, right? So there is substantial litigation running on this in multiple jurisdictions, and it's not always resolved. Like how are we going to adjudicate these kind of things here? I don't know, but the unresolved legal questions around what we actually upload to AI are there. Anyway, so there's that whole angle too. So yeah, something like a brief kind of traffic light system, I think, is a helpful rudimentary way to start approaching discernment. If we're going to be discerning between these two extremes of panic and hype, how do we start doing that? Something like a traffic light system that has to be informed by a theology of technology, which is, like I said, the Babel thing, or other passages that you might find. And I would say underneath the Babel has to come a robust theology of who Jesus is as well. Yeah.
So with your traffic light system, I'm thinking through something like theological triage, which we've talked about in so many sort of doctrines. Where do they fit in missional unity, and where do Christians have to agree for church leadership or local churches or more missional endeavors? And this would be something kind of similar, and you're creating a tier of different uses and the things that are more concerning, less concerning. Is that just your conscience that's driving you to categorize those though, or are you using particular criteria for what you put in the kind of red category? Is there maybe a condition where you're like, I can see this deforming us in some way, in that it's robbing humanity of something that we need to be able to form into healthy human beings and moral agents? Great
question. And this is where I think during COVID, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, all of that stuff. I don't think we should trust our conscience as much as we might want to talk about our freedom to exercise it. So no is my big conscience is part of it, and wow, we've got to respect it. Paul's clear on that in the New Testament. I'm not at all saying we shouldn't, but conscience needs to be informed and formed, and it needs to be formed by what? Right? I would say by the word of God. And so there is, like I was trying to say, there's a theology underneath all of this traffic light that has to inform our conscience with respect to it. So let me give just an example. Take preaching, okay? And let me just be a little bit blunt here to my evangelical brothers and sisters, whom I love dearly, and I'm one. I think many evangelicals have an impoverished, and I'm proud to be one, by the way. I think many evangelicals have an impoverished understanding of what happens when God's word is preached faithfully. Because a sermon is not just a talk, it's one of the ordinary, and I'm going back to the rich Protestant history here. It's one of the ordinary appointed ways that God encounters his people through his living and active word that reads us. Like the Tower of Babel is not a story we read. If you haven't picked up by now in this podcast, it's a story that's reading us. It exposes us, it cuts us, it confronts us, it comforts us. And so the Bible isn't just information that we master, right? It's this, and you've used these words, Dan, it's a curriculum that we submit to, which means that we cannot outsource biblical engagement to it. We can't, because we may be bypassing ourselves or denying others a direct encounter with the living God himself. And I mean, just ask yourself, what happens in the head and heart of a preacher when the words coming out of their mouth are arriving faster than their own head and heart can understand or connect with and keep pace with? So I think there's a real need for when it comes to the question of, can I use AI to help me write a sermon? The answer to that question has to be informed by your bibliology. What is your theology of Scripture? When AI is asked, okay, can I use AI to write a prayer? Well, what is your theology of prayer, communion? Can you outsource judgment? Can you outsource, like, formation is not an obstacle. Friction is not an obstacle to formation. Friction is the formation that we see over and over and over again, right? We grow through the fire. It's refiner's fire for a reason. And so, yeah, I that would be one example in the case of, say, writing sermons. You could do the same for prayer. You could do the same for pastoral care. But again, even then with pastoral care, now you're moving into legal issues and privacy issues, dignity issues, in terms of, the fact of the matter is, every time you put something into AI, it is getting handed over to a third person. Everything else, when it comes to the privacy conversation, is downstream from that fact. It's not a question of, it's a question that. And so everything now needs to be understood underneath that. And we just, for the sake of dignity of people, need to have a theology of privacy that's informing how we use these tools. But yeah, it gets even more specialized when it comes to specific pastoral care concerns around marriage counseling, around the advice that we give, around communication, around, say, grief. And that's something that I've been dealing with more recently with chatting with certain chaplains and so on, who've been struggling with grief and the way that school kids have been processing grief. It's been a very hard situation to walk through and talk through, but basically we're in this brave new world now where students are going to AI to process their grief over, in this case, a particular traumatic incident, rather than wanting to necessarily talk it out with teachers or with counselors or with psychologists or with even their parents. So, and on that point, right, this isn't just some theological claptrap here. There is rich literature about non-empathetic responses being harmful to people. And so we have the literature on that from a psych point of view, but what we don't have is the literature or the studies, because it's happening in real time, for the way AI is contributing to that, because AI is simulated empathy, but it's not actual empathy. And so you can process your grief with an AI chatbot. You can, and there's some help to that. I'm not saying that there isn't. It will clarify your thoughts for you, but it's a mirror reflecting back, neatly packaged with clarity, your own trauma, and just leaves it with you, as opposed to what Scripture says, which isn't, let us clarify one another's griefs, let us carry one another's griefs. And you don't get that with the chatbot that neatly hands it back to you. What you get with somebody, who helps carry your beliefs, say your grief, say in an embodied church environment, for example, is you have somebody that's embodied with you, facing you. You see their eyes, you see their shoulders slump, you see their body language, and that's a lot of non-verbal communication that makes up more communication than just the verbal aspect that is going on there. There's a hug, there might be shared tears. There's a sense in which you're getting the grief out and somebody else is carrying that with you. Emotions like grief, they need to be received by somebody to get it out of you, and it costs that other person in the reception of it. Kids learn their grief is real, and they're not going mad when mommy and daddy hug them, right? And they watch it land on your face, and they see somebody else struggling to hold it too. A machine can't do any of that. So there's a whole dimension there. And I'm just picking on grief from a pastoral right through to teachers at schools, parents, helping young people understand the nature of feelings, and how things like grief can be carried with other human beings. There's a lot more we could say about that, but
if we could talk about that generational divide for a second. So let's say people like us, and we were laughing before about going through that dial-up era. We're our mid and late teens. You're literally taking over the phone line in your house to be able to communicate online through MSN chat and all the rest of it. But we've gone through an era which was pre-mobile phone, pre-internet. Now we've experienced these huge shifts in how human life operates from the day-to-day basis. But a lot of our early formation happened in the absence of those things, where you are having more classical relational educational experiences, and you're not dependent on just search it up, which is like the common phrase of kids these days. Just search it up. I don't need to know anything because all the information is at my fingertips. I can just access it at any point, but then it's not shaping who I am or informing my humanity. And I think there's this real question to be asked around, are we sacrificing children now to the Moloch trap that you were describing before? In what ways should parents be concerned and trying to help put guardrails around their own children's use of tools like AI?
Yeah, good question. I've thought about the generational thing in terms of like 4 different befores. There's before the computer, we're in a house, and you and I are basically the same age, so you can track with this. Before the computer, we knew what it was to be in a house. Before the internet, we knew what it was to be on a computer. Before social media, we knew what it was to be on the internet. And now I remember what it was like before AI to be on the internet before AI. Now my kids are young enough, not using any of this stuff, that there's no befores. It's just going to be like a fish doesn't know it's wet. It's just in the water. Our kids, our next generation, is it alpha or whatever it is just going to be in the AI water, so to speak. And I don't want to turn that into a back in my day. Here's another middle-aged bloke, leaning on nostalgia. But each of those transitions, again, I've been a tech enthusiast along the way, but we have a point to help us discern through these situations. My wife, even in the medical field, is seeing it as well. She knows what it is to do primary healthcare before AI, and it has questions about the certain applications that are coming into primary healthcare now, whereas other generations aren't necessarily having that. Interestingly, though, the older generations are kind of more or less getting on board with it because it helps them not have to type. Interesting. But so the befores, right, are not giving any sense of superiority. It's a comparison class that these generations don't have. But when it comes to like, parents and children, and was that your question around like just general advice for parents and things like that?
Yeah.
So I think the first thing would just to orient yourself with that conversation again between panic and hype. Let's not do either. Let's have this not even a soft central middle road, but let's have discernment that's theologically informed and conscious aware. And once we have that, now let's come and have this conversation. So the before mandate isn't to, I don't think, run back to 1996, like all of these ironically AI produced videos I'm getting in my feed today. I don't know if you're getting those, like remember what it was to play Nintendo 64 and stuff. So nostalgia.
You must have triggered something.
I totally have. Nostalgia is a blockbuster of videos, and you watch these videos and you can smell the stale popcorn. It does take me back. Nostalgia is a terrible discipleship strategy. Okay, it's basically saying the good life was the one I happen to have. You don't have it. You miss out, and so you're punishing your kid with something they have no chance with. And they'll smell that. So I don't think we want to panic. I don't think we want to be hyped. I think we want to have calm, clear, concrete permission and use with bounds and limitations. So practically for parents, we don't have hot off the press evidence for specifically AI and how it's affecting children, but we have plenty of adjacent psychological literature and also even social media literature, thanks to people like Jonathan Haidt and others, that are overwhelming in their empirical evidence, showing us the perils and pitfalls and promises of certain technologies. And I think we need to be aware of that. Like, I just think every parent should be listening to somebody like a Jonathan Haidt. He's not the only one. Andy Crouch. Jonathan Haidt's not a Christian, but he's just done some wonderful work in this space. And debatably, he single-handedly was responsible for bringing in that 16-year-old age ban for social media here in federal legislation with Australia. So he's just done some wonderful research about the formation of a young mind under social media and internet use. But there are others from a Christian point of view, more specifically like Andy Crouch, TechWise Family, and he's got some other books out that are really helpful too. But the absence of hard data on AI, this would be my first point to answer your question for parents. The absence of hard data is not a reason to do nothing. This is the normal condition for parenting. So you don't need to know how much, what kind of damage too much sugar does on a child. You don't need to have the data before you just know I shouldn't give them too much sugar. We have partial evidence, accumulated wisdom, we have judgment. We don't need to be paralyzed. We need to be prudent. So that's the first thing is don't wait for some study to come out when it's too late, be proactive in this. Secondly, look at the asymmetry here, right? Like if you are cautious, overly cautious about what this can and may or may not do to your child, so your child has slightly less convenient childhood. So what? They have some more friction. So what? I think that's probably a good thing. This is certainly what Jonathan Haidt would say. It's better to go to a park that isn't bubble wrapped so your kid can break an arm and figure out how not to break it next time. Otherwise, they'll get out there in the real world and do all sorts of damage, right? So there's an asymmetry here in that it's a Pascal's wager, except applied to parenting. You're not going to miss out if you take action now with your young children to be more intentional about limiting their use of these tools. And this is where I think Christians have something that the research can't give you, and that is, the research will ask if it's harmful, important question, but it's also a very low bar. The Christian question is, what is forming you, and what is it forming you into? And just watch what happens to kids' capacity for frustration when everything is resolved in 2 seconds, right? I see this with my own children. Watch what happens to their willingness to sit down when a hard question is answered in a very prompt way. You don't need a research committee for that one. You just need to pay attention and see what happens. And so there's all sorts of things that that I would encourage parents to be doing in terms of the justification for taking action now prudentially. I mean, little things that Andy Crouch has taught me is like having rituals, we at our dinner table, as best as we remember, is we dim the lights and we put on candles, because it just creates a different occasion throughout the day that's otherwise filled with noise and sounds and screens. And so having it's a little tech Sabbath every evening, and attaching that to rituals that you already do, like a family dinner. And I'd highly encourage a family dinner if you're not doing that over, say, watching TV. But even then, I highly encourage watching TV together over watching phones separately. So there is, hierarchy here. But creating rituals in your day for things like that, that have a sense of unpluggedness about them. Tech Sabbaths more generally for families, perhaps a full day or so on. Certainly within your own private life, I'd highly encourage that as well. But all of these things are going to teach your child regulation, use. They're going to allow some degree of friction, which is healthy for formation and growth. Social calibration as well. Like there are already huge red flags about the computer gaming kind of impact on children in terms of social calibration. Emotional regulation as well. It's learned in relationship, embodied relationship. You get dysregulated pretty quickly when you're out of relationships. I learned that when I was alone for a month studying Thomas Aquinas. My mum got really freaked out thinking that I was going crazy. So it's helpful to learn in partnership.
But going crazy in 5 ways at least.
That's right. I was like, Mum, it's all about the being of essence. And she's just like, ringing my wife up. He was away on leave
I
saying,
think I'm noticing this is a real theme under a lot of what you're sharing is it's just trying to recognize where is humanity and are we leaning towards our humanity or are we leaning away from it? And are we leaning towards deeper, meaningful relationships or are we leaning away from it? And I'm just thinking in the back of my head how much the end game picture of what God has created humans
Mm,
for and what he's working towards in the vision of Revelation and the new creation, where you have the resurrected saints ruling and reigning alongside Jesus in deep and meaningful relationship, loving God, loving their neighbor, and then also exercising this stewardship over the new creation, genuinely gardeners and governors of that world, and all of the moral agency and maturity and spiritual virtue and everything that's part of that formation. You think, all right, is the way that we're engaging with the world, with technology, with one another, is it pointing towards that end or is it in some way unraveling that? And that might sit behind a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. This one's come in from Andrew Graham. He says, will AI strip humans of their abilities to create music, tech, writing, education, etc.? What impacts will AI have on those abilities? This very much comes down the line of something I was just wanting to kind of ask you. Is AI potentially, rather than helping us do everything easier, actually making us intellectually, morally, spiritually, emotionally weaker in some sense?
yeah, interesting. I again, the data isn't all in. So we've had some studies, MIT, although people have questioned that one about cognitive atrophy, but we already know we don't need new AI. This is my point. We don't need new AI data to see the trajectory here. As though that's some green light to go or not go anyways. We saw what just Google had already did to a generation. It's a small phrase, but it changes what a fact is, right? A fact used to be something that you carried. Now it's something that you retrieve on demand and so on. So yeah, there is, I think, I'm very comfortable saying, even though we don't have the data in front of us from things like that, that there is going to be cognitive atrophy coming in a documented way. Knowing things is what lets you think about things, because in order to think, you need to have things to think about. Yeah. So yeah, you can't notice a pattern between two facts you don't hold at the same time, and therefore you can't exercise discernment, which is the whole thing we've been talking about here. Insight happens between things that you already have in your mind. So things like biblical retention, memory verses, all the stuff that we did when we were young, if we grew up and were blessed to grow up in a Christian home, those are all on the table still here. So yeah, there is issues around cognitive atrophy, around retrieval, around outsourcing, synthesis, and so on. Not just where do I find it, but what do I make of it? This is the question of judgment. And, when it comes to AI as well, legally, the question of responsibility and is going to fall hard here on, well, who's responsible when AI makes a quote unquote autonomous move? Where does judgment and culpability really lie? So yeah, better outputs. There was a study done in 2024, actually, an experiment comparing LLMs with Google for student inquiry, if I'm getting this right, and they found that it reduced mental effort and raised concerns about compromised depth. So I think that's just obvious, but it's good to see that some studies are being done in that direction. Again, though, AI is great for many tasks. That's not the point. But if it gets you a better outcome for less strain on something that doesn't matter, and the question is what matters, and this is why we need the story to tell us. That's okay. But I think the question is whether we can tell the difference between the things that matter and the things that don't in the first place, because atrophy isn't just dramatic, right? Nobody notices the day they got worse at something. You just gradually stop attempting the thing that felt hard, and one day you find out that you can't even do it anymore. So yeah, the friction is not the friction is not the obstacle to the formation. The friction is the formation. This is just what it means to be human beings. And I think going back to the point there about, for parents as well, I'd probably say this. This has to begin with you, mum and dad, in your home. Kids are going to learn. Speak about authorities, listening to Jeffrey Hinton and all of the rest. Okay, but they're looking at you, and you have a wonderful opportunity to actually be an amazing, like you are the everything for a child. You are the authority for them, and they listen. They just believe you. It's an incredible opportunity to have little kids, if you do have little kids, and even if they're older and they're exercising their own independent judgment more, that's fine. You still have this opportunity to role model what it is you believe. There's a world of difference between saying your kids are addicted, hand it over, and saying, I think we've let screens take too much space in this home. So like owning our own responsibility there, needing to change. But here's a second point there related to that. I would encourage parents to think strategically here. Replace before you remove. So, if you take the phone away and give them
leave
nothing
idle
else,
hands. Yeah.
right, leave idle hands, you're not helping. You're going to create resentment and boredom. So don't say less screen time, more life, and never help them with the life, or more outside time, more backyard or whatever, but you never clarify that. More things to do. So otherwise, you'll just turn boredom into imagination, and they'll get their hands on it. And then along the way, just set those limits and explain why, and keep on role modeling. So this is why we're doing it. Not the screens are evil. Having that Babel inform, not preaching against the bricks, preaching against the towers. Is what it's doing. And I've done that with my kid. He's 6. We actually had the conversation after reading Jonathan Haidt, my wife and I, that we're going to stop watching 20 minutes of screen time a day. And this is why, because it affects them. And they were like, "Oh, okay." So it's like eating too many pieces of chocolate at one time. You just don't want to do it too much because it makes you sick. We love chocolate, but we just know it's not good. And we're like, yeah. And they're like, great. Okay. So they got on board, right? And it was an incredible thing. Now they still want to watch it, but we just remind them of that, and we process it. And we do, though, and this would be a final thing, have communal touch points, because you don't want them to have this unhealthy, coveted kind of idolatrous view of technology either. So we do allow them to enjoy it. We watch movies, but I'd encourage, and this is Jonathan Haidt again, make it communal.
I think it's really wise. Again, it's leaning towards deep relationship. It's really leaning towards shared humanity. I think that's really helpful.
Was there something in that question about music that I didn't even touch on, or?
No, I just think the creativity element. And I do think here, like, that's what when I have older people in my life and they say, when it comes to muscle, use it or lose it. And I think when it comes to these human faculties of ingenuity, of creativity, of how to think and reason well, and you apply logic, if we continually outsource that and they're not exercising muscles these gifts that we've been given, I do think you're going to immediately see a dumbing down of our capacities in that regard by outsourcing it to AI, which I don't think has the same genuinely creative genius of the human mind and its ability to piece together new ideas. So, yep, that would certainly be a concern of mine. Be careful what you're outsourcing towards AI, as we discussed before, if it's leading away from your formation.
So
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to say that, that's another whole subject as well for churches, about AI and music and worship music. So that's something else that people should be running through their own rubric.
Yeah. And speaking of churches and pastors, there's a couple of ethics questions that I'd just love to get maybe shorthand a couple of quick thoughts on. So these are situations that pastors are having to deal with, particularly one, as we've seen a huge rate in the rise of loneliness, of people that find themselves single forever, in a sense, they're not finding romantic relationships, and the potential then for humanoid robots, or if nothing else, AI companions, potentially AI girlfriends or boyfriends in some kind of romantic sense. What would be your advice to pastors who are having to give counsel around running to AI companions for emotional connection?
Yep. And it's happening. It's not if, it's that it's happening. And I'm not a prophet in your church, but I'd dare say it's happening already in your church. And so this is here, whether or not you're ready for it or not. The first, I think, posture just needs to be compassion. So if a young person, and I don't mean to pick on young people, it's not all young people, but there's, again, the fish in the water doesn't know it's a wet thing. There is perhaps more of a tendency with younger generation. If they're emotionally attached somehow, if they're fine, and they might not use that language, they might just find that they're spending a lot more time processing their day. I know people who drive home from work and just talk with Claude to process their day. And I'm not saying that's all bad. Again, it depends on what's happening to you. But I'll just start with compassion. And this is, again, another signal of transcendence. Like, what is that gesturing at? What's it grasping after? What's the longing there? And there's a question of loneliness and anxiety and social fear and shame and family breakdown. Just the sheer difficulty of being known by real people sometime, who don't always listen very well, and who perhaps cast judgment at you. And a chatbot will not cast judgment upon you. And so there's a very easy way to be able to externalize your thoughts there, because it's basically you just talking to yourself into a mirror and having your own thoughts come back at you. So it's already on your side, so to speak. And you can control the outcome there. Real people are harder. So just trying to, first of all, is just understanding of all of that is what I'm trying to say. The pastoral approach here, particularly if there's a generational difference, should never be, that's weird, stop it. Because again, you're just going to drive people further into this. The deeper answer is, what is the hunger underneath this that's trying to be satisfied? And once you can name that counterfeit intimacy problem directly, at least for yourself, then I think that will steer your own pastoral instincts as you move forward about navigating AI companionship, AI generated pornography, which is, I think it's coming if it's not already here. I heard Sam Altman talking about upgrading ChatGPT one day to be able to have erotic conversations and all of the rest, which is just an alarm bell for, like, once you start attaching AI deep fakes to pornography, now you're having a whole world of what's real and what's not. And I don't think I need to spell out the implications of that in terms of privacy and uploading anyone's photograph and all sorts of things that could happen in that space. I think that's starting to happen. I just don't know how that's going to ever be regulated. But
and I think some of the wisdom then maybe for leaders listening in would be when it comes to the pastoral needs that people have around these conversations, just do good theological formation. Help them understand what is it that relationships are pointed towards in the Christian story and what romance is created for. And so compassion for the felt need there, but also explanation of, hey, there's a reason why this is outside of God's good design and ways that it could malform you because it's not fulfilling the purpose for which it's ultimately given, and maybe what these desires are pointing towards. And that kind of raises the next question I wanted to ask you, which is around someone saying to a pastor, okay, I watch church online sometimes. Maybe I attend AI church in that I'm actually going into virtual reality and I'm going in and listening to an invented sermon by an artificial agent that's in there. Why do I need God? Why do I need the church anymore if technology can do for me so much stuff? How might a pastor respond to a world that's leaning more into technology? What does the church need to lean the most into in order to form that counter liturgy you're talking about?
Yeah. Interesting question. So I think a lot of what we've said already comes together to give that answer about the nature of what it means to be human, the need for limitations, the need for reciprocity, embodiedness, and so on and so forth. And so I actually think what we're going to find is potentially a real premium on something as ordinary as a local church, because let's just take doom scrolling, for example. That's addictive. It still is addictive, but at the same time, there's a sense in which doom scrolling is getting a little bit boring now because it's just clogged with artificial fakery. The whole little tiger that used to be a National Geographic incredible video shot, and now it's just like, well, that's just a dime a dozen, and who knows if it's real or not. It kind of makes the wow factor go away completely of the incredible original National Geographic, which goes back, by the way, to the art and so on. But at the same time, I think so I think there is going to be a bit of a revolt against all of this online stuff, and I actually would positively want to maybe even push a little bit against that question and say, I wonder if we're going to see a higher premium on something as ordinary / mundane as a Sunday morning gathering, because it's embodied, it's real. It's not fake, it's authentic, and people, this is just a part of how we're made. People desire that, they crave that. And so maybe part of the texture of the salt and the clarity of the light for the church in this age of AI is going to be precisely our embodiedness, and continuing to do, as Hebrews 13 says, meet with one another, all the more as the day draws near. So I think, that there's going to be a premium potentially on that. It was Malcolm Guite who was talking about, he thinks maybe people are going to get over all of the scrolling and the movies and actually want to get down to a local library and listen to poetry being read. I don't know if that's a bit idealistic, but
there is that sense in which people are being drawn towards history and liturgy and even more traditional forms of Christianity, almost because it's like a revolt against the loud, the noisy, the entertainment culture, to say, actually, I want something rooted in something ancient, I want something that feels transcendent and otherworldly and sacred and weighty, rather than just flippant and lighthearted. So I think you're probably seeing symptoms of that. But do you think there's some things that churches, particularly, let's say, in more of our tradition, in the kind of evangelical Protestant space, things that they could lean into that would be helpful counter liturgies, even practically given a Sunday service? What are some of the things that you might say, hey, here's some wisdom on how we're living that out?
Yeah. So shared meals matter, right? Bodies matter. Um, Pastoral visits in hospitals matter. All of these regular things. I actually think uh, the things that churches have been known to do are precisely the things we should keep on doing. The call here is not for pastors to become AI experts. It's for pastors to continue to shepherd in an age of AI, and that
Mm,
has to come with maximal theological clarity. And you don't get a clarity around the intelligence aspect of the artificial intelligence unless you have a good Christology, the word become
mm,
flesh, the logos, right? So a theology of technology needs to be formed upon a theology of Christ. So yeah, becoming clearer about our convictions, which is probably the first move against that Babel, against fear, speak the truth. And I think that that would be refreshing in that sense.
mm,
And then you've got those other practices we talked about there about embodiedness. I would, little things like down to a meeting. It's easy to do face Zoom or whatever meetings with teams today. I'd encourage where it's possible to get in the room with one another for your leadership team meetings,
mm,
for your Bible study groups and so on. Use the tools where it can service people in love, but if you don't need to, don't do it. And it's going to take you more time to drive there. But these are little things
mm,
like, and so that would be against like trying to make a name for yourself, like setting wise limits, I think, and that would be one on just physical space.
mm,
Saying no to certain things just because you can doesn't mean you should, because there's a whole lot that happens when you're face to face with somebody
mm,
versus over the screen. Because you're like, to be human is to have at least 5 senses amongst a whole lot of other things, and you shut down 3 of them just to audio visual when you're on a screen, and then you shut down
mm,
4 of them when it's just verbal on a phone. And again, the science will tell you that there's a whole lot of communication that's missing when you don't sit in a room with
mm.
somebody. So that practicing
Yeah.
embodied partnership is a huge thing. But like we have
Mm,
the liturgies on the table for us, literally pun intended, with the Lord's Supper. Like getting together and doing this together. It's actually consuming something together and leaning into the meaning of that. So I think we need to maximize in a thick way our core
mm.
convictions that we already have. And that is the theology that's going to drive our own kind of conscience as we seek to write policies and think through how we're going to traffic light this for ourselves. Don't know if
Mm.
that answers the question, Dan.
I think there's a tons in there that people can map out. And for us, it's been similar even with my local church where I'm trying to help out as much as we can, think through how do we tell a story with our Sundays? How do we help people connect with God and the gospel when we gather together physically? And just from using physical Bibles so that people aren't distracted on their
Yeah.
technological devices, and just encouraging that to read along with us, really meaningful biblical readings within our services. So you're trying to help people enter the story and exit from there just distracted sort of
That's
thinking
good.
through just how our lyrics are communicated, and encouraging people that worship isn't just a private moment between you and God, but we're to encourage one another, to let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and encourage one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs.
Mm.
And that there's this sense of participation that's deep in our Sunday experiences. So even without our sharing of the Lord's table, of people getting up from their seats to come and receive the elements, something as small as that, where it's not you're being catered to as though it's all coming around and you're a consumer in the middle of this experience, largely passive, but actively participating and moving, using our bodies and conversations. We have a post-service meal on a Sunday evening and stuff. And so there's just a lot of those features which I think are really helping people lean more into the humanity, the deep and meaningful humanity, the
Yeah.
formation of agency, which can be a bit more passive in the kind of
Just
technological race.
one more thing that you just triggered in my thoughts. So, presence is a huge thing that you've been talking about there, and like how we go through some of the things we do at church. Something else that I've been catching myself even in this chat is language hygiene. I think this can start at home with ourselves, before our families, but then also in a church context as well. And you would have heard me capturing words of intentionality or personal pronoun kind of uses and stuff. Just being mindful of how we speak about AI, and that depends upon what we mean by AI. So we need the clarity in place to do that. But I'm resistant to calling Alexa a she or a he, and I'm not saying that to be difficult, right? I'm saying that to be mindful that the lines between AI and between
Human
personification
personhood.
and
Yeah.
persons is blurry. Like there's a funness and a playfulness with personification. My son has a little stuffed toy, and he's got a whole personality in a whole make-believe world. But at no point in play does my son ever or my daughter ever get confused as to where the line is, because little Georgie, the stuffed dragon, doesn't talk back. But ChatGPT does. And so I'm mindful of just language hygiene, not calling it Alexa a she. Don't say it knows or it decides. It generates, it predicts, it produces output. AI told me so. This is a tool. And I think our theology of technology needs to recognize its place as a tool. Again, I don't think that's pedantry. I think it's just protecting that personhood boundary. So that would be another thing, is language hygiene, practicing presence, and all of the other opportunities that churches have. I really want to encourage churches, like if anyone's listening to this, to go back and have a team meeting and brainstorm.
Maybe
you'll have,
develop an AI policy as part
yeah,
of that, for right AI use and right language around use of technology within the church.
yeah, totally. Yep.
Well, let me do a quick fire round with you, because we had a bunch of questions that were sent in around AI, mostly from Christians and people that are in church leadership. And so I'm going to restrict your answers to short form here so we can close this out. Is AI the mark of the beast from Revelation?
Okay, AI, mark of the beast, Revelation chapter 13. Mark of the beast is connected with worship. We know that it's connected with allegiance. People worship the beast and the image. Without the mark, no one can buy or sell. So there's an economic thing that's wrapped in there. It's not just merely a scary government database. So it's all fundamentally, whatever the mark of the beast is, and I'm not presuming to know what it is, it's got to do with allegiance against some sort of system that is in rebellion to God. It's bound up with worship, coercion, economic exclusion. Okay. Could future technology make Revelation 13 possible, plausible? Yeah, I think absolutely, insofar as we can see how that could start to happen now. Am I saying that AI is the mark of the beast? No, I don't think it necessarily is, but I think it could be some sort of tool used in the service of that. I appreciate that I'm giving a particular view, a theological view, in answer to that question, and Christians are going to have different views as to what the mark of the beast is, if it even is a future thing or what. But I think whatever or however, we can all agree on the mark of the beast saying something about worship, about who owns you, who names you, who you trust for your security. And I think AI can have something to do with that, but I'm not going to say it's necessarily that. No, it's not what's in your hand. It's all about who has your heart, and AI is already showing us that is an issue.
Would you trust an AI pastor?
Yeah, okay. I don't think that question even makes sense. Is AI even a pastor, a shepherd, functioning the purpose of one who helps navigate and lead me in the Word of God? I don't think it is a pastor. So would I trust an AI pastor? No, because I think it's an oxymoron. AI can produce words. Those words can be good because they're mined from databases of people who wrote good things down. The question is, what are the answers it's offering? What is the chatbot answerable to? A shepherd, a pastor, a leader. Hebrews 13 again, I think 13, 17 or something, or 10. Chapter 10, I can't remember. Sorry, I think it's 13. Says that
Hebrews
a pastor,
13, 7 and 17. Yeah.
7. Yeah, a pastor is answerable before God for the souls under their care. You cannot delegate that to a system. So AI can help you prepare, but it can't replace the pastor on their knees, calloused, accountable to God for his people, or their people. So, no, I don't think I would trust an AI pastor, because I don't think AI pastors are a thing to exist and therefore trust at all.
These next few are driven by realities of what's happening right now. Would you confess your sins to ChatGPT?
For the same reasons that I just answered, no. Again, it can receive anything, and it can be affected by nothing. And that's the whole problem here, right? An apology isn't the correct arrangement of remorse-shaped words. This involves repentance. Confession is meant to be something that costs something and land on someone, and a machine might be able to generate absolution-shaped text or symbols, I guess, because it's only working in zeros and ones if you want to be really precise, but it's not going to forgive you. It cannot pray for you. It cannot do anything with the sins that you confess. It certainly cannot carry them away. It can't die for you. So no, it's not achieving anything, perhaps clarity over the sins that you're speaking out, but it's not going to forgive them and absolve them or carry them away as far as east is from the west.
And I mean, on that one, in a strange way too, you're offering up very personal information to something that may sell that information on, or that could be leaking that information to other sources. The kind of point of going public about your sin to a safe person is the idea that you're not hidden in shame in the dark, but that's been entrusted to someone who can help you step into the light, rather than entrusted into corporations who may turn that information back on you in a dystopian future. Would you let your child have an AI best friend?
Yeah. No. And I think that's obvious. That was a joke. I think that's
a very Australian. Yeah, nah.
Yeah, nah. Given everything we've said, right? But I'd want you to know why they wanted one. And I think that is a big thing for you as a parent to think about. Because the chatbot will feel safe precisely because it's controllable, and real friendship isn't, real parenting isn't. A system that never has a bad day is not a low stakes practice ground. Okay. It's a different game entirely. And so don't ban and lecture, but ban and table and have that conversation with your children and understand what it is they're searching for and reaching for, and where they can really find it.
And you discussed this one before, and we've got a question in the chat along this line too. But would you bring back a dead loved one as an AI?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think these questions are interesting, Dan, because they're all not really making sense to me. I understand what the question is, but the point is, I think they're actually confused. It's a very good question, but would I bring back a dead loved one as an AI? I don't think you can bring back a dead loved one as an AI. At least it's not the one that it was. It's a simulation.
It's a technological ghost.
And so grief needs to be received by somebody that it costs something to receive. It needs to be carried. A simulation hands us back our grief. It tidies it up. It leaves us holding it alone. And our hope is not a copy. Our hope is not a suboptimal, minimal copy of some things about somebody that we used to love. It's the resurrection from the dead that is full embodied and eternal. And that is the hope I'm going to cling on to. So would I bring back a dead loved one as an AI? Number one, I don't think I can. But number two, no, I'm not looking back at that. I'm loving them, and I'm loving and thanking God for them. And I'm looking forward to the hope of a resurrection from the dead, and the one who is the judge of all the earth, making all things new and right and good. And I lean on him for that. And as sure as Jesus walked out of the empty tomb, I can be assured of that. So yeah, that's where I rest my faith. But I get the heartache and I get the hunger there, but that's why it drives me all the more to the forward-facing hope that I have in Jesus because of what he's done in the past. Yeah.
Well, mate, that's been really, I think, insightful, just being able to shed some light on a lot of different questions, both just in the state of play technologically and where the conversation is at with the development of AI and AGI and rogue agents that are out there in the world. Let's certainly pray against some of the more extreme fears and the Skynet revolution that could be taking over the world near you. But more seriously, just in terms of helping people think through discipleship patterns and what it means to be formed as disciples of Jesus with that end in mind of loving God, loving others, and becoming wise moral agents in the world. I think if we have that framing and just are running it through the grid, those traffic lights, there's been some really useful bits of wisdom that you've offered. Just one final question as we wrap up then that I'll leave you with. After everything that we've sort of shared today, what might you want Christians specifically to walk away with as we wade into the age of AI?
Yeah. The answer is one that I'm finding more and more true of myself. And that is the clarity of your theology is your greatest asset in this moment, not your tech literacy. So I don't want anyone to feel the burden of that after this chat. It's not your AI policy. I don't want anyone to feel the burden of that. These are all things I'm encouraging, but it's your theology that I think is the greatest asset in this moment. And that is driven fundamentally by the word of God and the work of the Holy Spirit in your life as he brings you to a knowledge of the truth. It's things that you already believe, Christian brothers and sisters, that we need to hold with clarity and conviction now more than ever, because all of the questions that are getting raised are questions that are going to press upon all of these dimensions of truth, goodness, and beauty. And so if you already believe the word of God is living and active, you're not going to outsource your encounter with scripture. If you already believe that church is embodied community gathered around real sacraments, you're not going to let that dissolve into content platform and quote unquote online church with a AI pastor. If you already believe in the priesthood of the saints and shepherds amongst flocks, you're not going to let care become simulation of some kind. If you already have a belief in the Imago Dei, the image of God, and human dignity being grounded in that, not in function and output, you're not going to be measuring people by what they can do for you, what they can produce, right? If you already believe in the one God who came down uniquely and personally in Jesus Christ, you know that the answer to Babel was never smarter building or more impressive tower. They just didn't get to the top, and too bad. It's divine descent. And in an age of AI, things are going to change. The technology is going to change. AGI capabilities might blow things up. Quantum computing, all of that stuff. Things are going to get wild, right? I'm not downplaying that things aren't moving in a direction that's going to get harder and harder to regulate and control, and the fears are going to. But we just need to maintain that 1 Timothy 2:7 poise, 1 Peter 3:15 poise, actually. But not having a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. And that translates in the 1 Peter 3:15 sense as looking different to the world when everything's aching and shaking. And people might come to you and ask for a reason for the hope that you have within you. What is this thing that's keeping you stable? And now you have an opportunity to share the good news of Jesus just by your sheer stability, not in yourself, but in Christ, as you honor and revere the Lord as holy in your hearts. And this is who we are called to be in this age. For such a time as this, you are here. And we are called to be in the world, not of the world. We need to draw our lines like Daniel in Babylon. He took the name, he took the education, he didn't take the food. We need to figure out those traffic lights, draw the lines, and understand what the clarity of our light and texture of our salt will be in this age of AI. And I don't think our task is to become, as pastors, specifically tech experts. It's to help pastor in an age of AI where there is all sorts of confusion out there.
Yeah, lean into the things that make you the most valuable, not trying to play catch up with everyone else in the same thing. Mate, that's been so insightful. Just thanks for being willing to come and speak to so many of the questions that we've thrown your way. This is Dave Deane. For anyone who hasn't seen him before, he's my colleague here with Questioning Christianity, both on the East Coast, but in different cities.
Yeah. Can I just say something? I just preached. You asked me to say something to the Christians. I just want to say to anyone else who's listening, though, like AI is going to surface fears. I want to encourage you to bring those out to the one who casts out our fear. AI is going to highlight your limits. Run to the one for whom nothing's impossible, and it's gonna raise questions. And I want you to ask those questions because, as we like to say here, Dan, truth invites questioning, and it's going to stand up under scrutiny. And I want to encourage you to anchor it to the word that never changes. Yeah.
Super helpful. Well, team, thanks so much for watching this to the end. If it's your first time here at Questioning Christianity, please do go ahead and subscribe. And if you know someone that this conversation will help, I know a lot of people are asking these questions, people in Christian leadership, people who are just trying to navigate in their families, how to think about AI and technology. Maybe you're not a Christian and you're watching this. Please do send this to someone that you think it will help, and it just helps get this discovered. If more people in the next little while start watching it, send comments and likes, do all the interacting things to help boost the algorithm and get the word out there. And as always, we have hundreds of other videos on this channel helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. Can't wait to be putting out more content in the next few weeks. Keep your eyes peeled. And until then, I hope you have a great time. Bless you. Bye.
Thanks.